Welcome to this week's study in the Sermon on the Mount. Today we're just looking at one verse, Matthew 5:13. So please read along with me. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Chloride is a highly toxic element that in a gas form is deadly. It exists in seawater and in this state can be extremely corrosive. Sodium is an element that attaches itself to other elements to form various chemical compounds. When sodium unites with chloride, it becomes sodium chloride, salt. That which is otherwise deadly and toxic is rendered useful by being blended with something outside of itself. More than useful, salt is essential to human life and really to life in general, not just to human life. It has multiple uses as a preservative, flavoring, disinfectant, and has been used in religious ceremony as well as a form of money. The word salary that we have in English is a direct descendant from the Latin word for salt, because back in ancient days, Roman soldiers were given an allotment of salt that was called salary. They needed that. That was kind of the part of their payment. After outlining the characteristics of a wholehearted believer in the Beatitudes, Jesus then shares with his listeners how they ought to live in the world. And that's really where we move to next in the Sermon on the Mount, as a practical application of this heart belief that we have. How is it lived out now in our lives? And this becomes very important. People who say that they like the Sermon on the Mount really are talking about the Beatitudes, those who are not believers. They don't really like the way Jesus means for us to live it out, because the living out of the Sermon on the Mount is pretty demanding, very demanding, and especially it can't be done without the help of the Holy Spirit, without a transformation of our lives into something different by the working of God in our hearts. Anyway, so he's chooses something very familiar to the people, like he did with his parables and a lot of his teaching. He uses the very common element of salt to make his point. So and he knew everybody would know what salt is. So he didn't say in this illustration that the believers were going to be like salt. He said they are salt. There's no way to opt out of being the salt of the earth. For salt to be effective, it has to be used. It can't just sit in a salt and pepper shaker. It really is, I mean, we have salt and pepper shakers. You see some here. Uh, you know, it Salt and pepper shakers are decorations, but really, salt can't be I mean, gold can sit there and be useful because it has value and can sit there and never be touched, never be seen, or anything else. That's not true of salt. Salt is only useful when it is used. It's got to be put to use. And a believer to be to serve his purpose has to be used, has to be put to work out in the world. We need to understand that we can't just sit there and in contemplation and meditation and reflection, although there's times for that. But a Christian to be used, we have to be out there. We have to be in the world. We have to be touching other people. We have to be in contact. Otherwise, we are not of any use for God. It's good for us to meet in our buildings. It's good for us to have times of fellowship with each other. But we need to live our lives out in the world. And that's what Jesus is saying. Also, another thing with salt is for it to be useful, it has to be dissolved. Think about it. We have, um, it really is useful when it can't be seen anymore. If you sprinkle salt on your food, what happens? Well, the salt dissolves into your food or if you're cooking it, it dissolves into the things that you're cooking and so on. Um, and we need to remember that we live in a world that's often hostile to our message, and it is it is uh, hard for us to sometimes come out and just you know get out there and say things, but we permeate in the world that we live, and we influence things that happen. We do that. We dissolve into the world where we live so that we begin to change things. And sometimes we forget that we do have an influence. We make a difference, and it's not always seen openly, but it is there. Uh, and so we, I'll give you a good example of that. Uh, Mahatma Gandhi, although he was Hindu, a lot of what he did was not influenced by Hindu religion, but by the Christian religion that he came into contact with. He was influenced more by the teachings of Christ than he was by the Hindu religion when he went out and did his work. People forget about that, but it was the teachings of Christ that really influenced him and how he approached the world. Salt also was inexpensive. Among the items in our grocery cart when we go shopping, probably one of the least glamorous and the least exciting is salt. You know, but it is necessary. It's quiet, and without much fanfare, salt does its work. Many of us are not very. I mean, if we admit it, we're not very exciting people. We don't. We're not on television. There's not reporters chasing us around asking us our opinion about this or that. We're not. Our picture is not seen on the internet, and we're not on coins or on the front covers of magazines or that kind of thing. Um, but the world needs people like us, um, who are in our homes, unseen, doing what we need to do for Christ, just like the world, like we need salt, unseen, doing its work. Usefulness is not defined by popularity. Valuable contributions cannot always be calculated in dollars and cents or by who votes for you or who buys your books or sings your songs. Jesus is saying that in the world we matter. We have a role that is essential, whether or not it is always valued by the world. It is valued by him. Before modern refrigeration, the most common way to preserve meat was by salting it. I have some meat here that this is salted meat that you see displayed here. But even with refrigeration, we know that many manufactured products include salt as a preservative. If you read the labels of what is in your meat products, you'll see that salt is still there. We know that what happens when preservation fails. If you have ever lost power in your home for a few days because of a storm or something and opened a freezer afterwards, you will know what happens to meat. This world is constantly moving toward decay, all the time toward decay. What happens when a city is abandoned? Well, this world is constantly. You'll find out that what happens is that very soon the weeds start taking over, that the structures start to crumble, that the roads begin to crack and split apart. Decay is a natural state of things. I have some forest behind me, and if you were to walk through that forest, you'd find that there are fallen trees, and the trees very soon after they fall, they begin to decay, and the leaves that fall begin to rot, and so on and so forth. Decay is a natural state of the world. Now, salt preserves. And the point I want to make here is that we are the salt of the world. And if salt is removed, then the world decays quicker. Imagine if all the salt, if the salt was removed, the decay would happen fast. And if all the Christians were removed from the world, the decay in the world would happen much quicker. It would be a chaos. This this statement that Jesus made comes with a warning. He said, if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and be trampled underfoot. Now, how can a dog quit being a dog? Well, it can't. It is its nature to be what it is. You may train a dog to do this or that thing that may not be dog like. like you can maybe teach it to sit up on its hind legs and walk on its hind legs, but I can't do that for very long. It's going to get back down on all fours. And, the thing is, when it's happy, it's going to wag its tail. And you might have the most purebred, beautiful dog for a dog show and whatever else, but you give that dog a chance, and it's going to get right in the trash and start rooting to the trash and rummage through it and eat garbage, just like some street dog, because that's the nature of a dog. They're scavengers. That's the nature of a dog. Well, when salt, it's the nature of salt to be salty. And Jesus is saying, if salt quits being salty, what good is it? What's the point of it? How can salt quit being salty? It's hard to, you can't even imagine that. How, if salt is not salty, what is it? That's the only reason it exists. If it isn't salt, it must be something else. Well, we find something John Stott, who's a wonderful Bible teacher from the past, who we lost a few years ago. He's in glory now. Says this. Let me read this. He says that Dr. David Turk has suggested what was then popularly called salt was in fact a white powder which, while containing sodium chloride, also contained much else, since in those days there were often no refineries. Of this dust, the sodium chloride was probably this most soluble component, and so the most easily washed out. The residue of white powder still looked like white salt and was doubtless still called salt, but neither tasted or acted like salt. It was just road dust. So apparently in Bible days, there was something that still looked like salt, was white like salt, but the real salt had been left, it was gone. It was just a white powder. And that would maybe what Jesus was referring to. So there was something that looked like salt, but really wasn't salt. And isn't it a sad thing to have somebody who is a Christian who looks like it, but really has lost the saltiness of their life? They have no influence. They quit being what they're supposed to be. They've lost who they are. Sad. Now, Jesus didn't say we are the cocaine of the earth to take the pain away from people or put them into some sort of numbness. We are not called the sugar of the earth to make things sweet for everybody and make things go down better. We are called the salt of the earth, so we can do our work in the everyday traffic of life. So are you being salt where you are? That's the challenge that Jesus has given us, and that's the challenge for you this week. Be the salt of the earth. God bless you.